Hi everyone, and welcome back. We are joined today again by Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson to discuss some of these alliance systems which appear to be falling apart. So welcome back to the program.
Good to be with you again, Glenn.
So there's this huge global shift in our time, well, defining our times at least, which is this power shift from the west to the east, which is predictably disrupting all the alliance systems and also, I guess, world order itself. And in Europe, they seem to be stuck as they can't imagine a world different from the bloc politics we had since World War II. And in East Asia, we see countries like South Korea and Japan, they're rethinking the excessive dependence on the alliance system with the United States. But also in the Middle East, we see now some rethinking of how to maintain their security. And I guess the most important development recently has been Israel's attempt to assassinate the Hamas negotiators in Doha in Qatar. But I guess from my perspective, the most significant thing isn't that the Israelis are trying to murder peace negotiators, but rather that this is being done on an attack against one of the countries in the region which are closest to the United States. I mean, if the U.S. can't keep Qatar safe, well, what does this say about the order? I was wondering how you're reading this whole situation, what's happening in the Middle East, because I have to be honest, I had not expected anything like this.
Nor had I, though I feel like I should thump myself in the head for not suspecting it. Bibi Netanyahu is our tool. I think that. I think we use him. We, as a colonialist empire, use him to fulfill our strategic interests, primary of which is protecting the flow of oil from the Gulf, but that hasn't changed for 50 years. But also to do other things like execute the clean break strategy, which calls for all these countries to be essentially regime changed, ending, we think, with Iran. Perhaps not, perhaps going beyond there, but certainly ending with Iran, who you might argue is the major culprit, if that's the right term, in the region. With respect to the empire and to Israel, it probably is. But I did not think that in the pursuit of using Israel to do this, because that's what I think is happening. Israel doesn't wag us, we wag them. But in this, we've encountered a leader in Israel who is not very attentive to that relationship and thinks he runs it and thinks that anything he does will have to be followed in the wake, as it were, by the United States. So I'm hearing, and from very reliable sources, and let me back up just a little bit and tell you what I heard, and you may have heard it too, from Gilbert Doctorow, Dr. Doctorow, on Judge Napolitano's show this morning. After his conversations, a name he would not reveal, and I don't blame him, with a German parliamentarian, as I understood his remarks, who spent lots of times for Germany in Iran. And he told me, on the show, Dr. Rose said, in essence, what happened was Netanyahu told President Trump categorically he was going to use a nuclear weapon on Iran. And what President Trump did was say, no, don't. I'll do the job for you. And that job will be the B-2s and the subsequent strikes on Fordo and Isfahan and other Iranian nuclear facilities. That will keep that from happening. Now, you could say, if this is all true, you could say Netanyahu was just bluffing, and he was bluffing in order to get Trump to do precisely what Trump did. But that's an indicator of where we are with this individual. And this individual, right now, caught in both a political trap and a military trap, security trap, I'll call it. He's engaged on a number of fronts. He's losing his military. He's losing the citizenry of Israel. If he didn't have these draconian restrictions on travel, he'd have probably lost another million on top of the million he's already lost. He's losing all around. And so the only course he sees is to keep going and double down and triple down. I think that meant that he had to stop these negotiations because he wants to destroy everyone he can possibly destroy before any ceasefire occurs, certainly before end of war occurs. And these negotiations, led by Witkoff, were going to stop that. They were going to put a stop to it, and they were going to come to some sort of ceasefire agreement and then some sort of agreement over post-conflict Gaza, West Bank, Jerusalem, and so forth. Bibi can't tolerate that, so he decided he would, in fact, take on the negotiators, much the way he'd done the same murderous thing in Iran during negotiations. But I'm really worried about the fact that there are signs, and really hard signs from some of my contacts within the security complex, that we actually were informed and that we actually flew a manner of CAP over Doha, Combat Air Patrol. Not with fighters, that would have been too obvious. We flew it with ash and trash aircraft, logistics aircraft, that sort of circled around in the vicinity of Al Udeid and of the strike, and confirmed to the Israelis as they flew in over other people's airspace, of course, that there was nothing to challenge them. And so they came on. Whether Donald Trump knew this or not is a real question for me, both as an American citizen worried about my country and also a military professional, because I know how the crisis action process works. And I know how presidents can really adopt one of two methodologies. They can adopt the one the military likes the most and always asks for, and that is maximum leeway for the unified command commander on the ground. In this case, Central Command Commander, forward located in Bahrain or at Al Udeid most of the time. That means that he can do whatever he wants to do on the ground, in the air, within the general scope of the concept of operations. The other method, and there are variations, of course, but the other stark method is the president says everything. Think Ronald Reagan and the strike on Libya in 2008 or whenever it was. No, not 2008. Whenever it was, Operation El Dorado Canyon, when the FB-111 struck Libya. The string on that was pretty tight, very tight. So which concept was being used? Which operational technique was being used? Was this the unified command commander deciding that he would, because they're like this, Glenn, he has people in Israel's staff offices, and they have people in his staff offices. They're tight as lips and teeth. So he had to know this was going to happen. And did he take his own initiative and provide that cover and, in effect, violate our relationship with our other ally in the region, Qatar? I don't know. Or did Trump direct it? Did Trump direct him to do that? Or did Hegseth direct him to do that? Because I'm pretty sure that we knew about it and we actually helped protect it. So this is a real conundrum for me, both as a military professional and a citizen. I don't know that we aren't walking further down this road of absolute perfidy. I mean, going into negotiations with the Iranians and then allowing the Israelis to murder several of their key people and their family members. Go back to the assassination of Soleimani. He was on a peace mission also, and we hit him. And now here we are hitting Doha in order to preclude any successful negotiations on behalf of Bibi Netanyahu. This is not good.
But yeah, I'm also curious, the United States' role in this. But whenever I want to look at the changing alliance systems, often one only looks at the changes in distribution of power to try to assess how American interests are changing as well. But one thing that also happens when you have a huge change in the distribution of power is that the U.S. way of defining its own interest is also undergoing immense change. That is, should it stay in Europe? Should it go away? Should it deprioritize Israel, or should they just strengthen their relationship? So in other words, one can expect greater infighting as well within a state undergoing great change. I mean, comparably with the Soviet Union, when one assessed the Soviet policy, one tends to look at it as one entity, but when you looked within, there was infighting between, Gorbachev, Yeltsin, and this has to be factored in terms of how a state behaves. But you have a
You went to the conflict school of interpretation of the Soviet Empire. So did I.
yeah. Well,
I don't think there's any sense in the school of everything is always coordinated and blessed by the boss.
no, exactly. But unlike you, I don't have a background, as a colonel, from the government to, spend time in the White House. So I was curious with your background, how do you assess the situation? How severe do you think the infighting is with, not because we have a focus on the Trump administration opposition, but even within the Trump administration, there's it's a bag of mixed nuts. They're all, people are pulling a bit in different direction. How much do you see this possibly played out in this attack on Qatar?
I think it's played out majorly, and I think it's exacerbated majorly by the fact there is no national security advisor. Marco Rubio is not playing the role of national security advisor. The individual within the decision-making process in the empire, ever really since Eisenhower got Goodpaster and several others to sort of model this role, is the national security advisor. And that's the person. We abandoned cabinet government after World War II. Cabinet meetings are just pro forma for the TV cameras. The real meeting that makes the difference in foreign and security policy, which is, after all, for an empire, the policy, is the National Security Council. And the person who orchestrates that is the National Security Advisor, and usually her or his deputy, who have some major responsibilities in that regard. Now, we've had variations on themes since 1950, 52 or so, Eisenhower's being the first one. He actually created the role model with Goodpaster and others who evolved into being that position, which isn't subject to Senate confirmation, not a political appointee in that sense. National security advisor, supposed to be a very competent person, supposed to be a person like, for example, even if you detest him, he was really good, Henry Kissinger, or one like Brent Scowcroft, who probably was one of the best we've ever had. We do not have any of that. So what we have is chaos. We have utter chaos. We have Rubio in his Secretary of State role focusing on mostly Venezuela, but other aspects of Latin America too, which he seems to hate as a routine thing. We have Pete Hegseth concentrating on removing all of the vestiges of defense from the Defense Department and making it pure war, to include removing women. It's chaos, Glenn. It's chaos, and there's no one orchestrating anything like unity or purpose or strategic intent. There's no president to do that. He rules mostly by WhatsApp, tweets, whatever you want to say. And his remarks are so impolitic that I wonder that people in the world have a clue as to which directions he's going at any given moment on any given issue. So it's chaos. That's the answer to your question. There is no direction. There is no strategy. There is no policy. There is no strategy to implement that policy. And there are no people operating in accordance with that strategy. Now, we just had a major maybe change in direction with this defense strategy that's been leaked out, which essentially is a description of a moderate retrenchment, if not more retrenchment. They still, in that strategy, name, but almost pro forma, Russia and China. They still name some other aspects of the old strategy, but in essence, they say, in consonance with Trump's really kind of weird remarks about, I hope Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and Modi and the SCO enjoy their union. That's kind of what he said after he was briefed on what happened at the SCO series of meetings. And this is a response to that in writing. We are going to retrench and only concentrate on the Western Hemisphere. We're going to concentrate. It explicitly says the concentration points are the homeland and the Western Hemisphere. And the recent strike, however, against international law and every other precept of humanitarian law, it was on the boat headed for Trinidad from Venezuela is an indicator of that, I think. That's the way we're going to concentrate on the Western Hemisphere and concentrate on America. We're seeing that already. We're seeing that in Washington, D.C. We are about to see it possibly in Chicago. We've already seen it in Los Angeles. We see it at the southern borders. So if that's the case, and this is the first real articulation of policy and the strategies being developed to implement it are domestic deployment of military and militia and police and foreign shooting people on the high seas who are transporting drugs, then we have made a major change and we are in essence telling our allies, fat chance.
America's, yeah, pulling back. Again, this is quite important for not just the Middle East and East Asia and Europe. It's not very good news for Venezuela, though, if restoring control over the backyard is now elevated as a key objective. How do you think, though, the countries in the Middle East will reorient themselves accordingly? I mean, if the United States pull a bit back, is this going to compel the Gulf state to reassess the relationship with Iran in terms of resolving some of the, I guess, mutual hostility?
You would think so, because backing up this a little bit and going back to Carter's pronouncement in what was it, 78, 79, that the Persian Gulf was a vital U.S. interest because of the oil flow and such. And then considering the evolution of that strategy since then, we seem now not to be so much basing it on oil, although that's still a critical component, I think, for the colonial power that is America. But on this clean break strategy, which is being pushed by billionaires and others behind the scenes who want to finish off the clean break strategy. We call them neoconservatives, but they're more than that. Some of them are globalists in the terminology. Some of them are just plain haters of Persians. And that goes all the way back to the mental syndrome taken out of the 444 days of U.S. hostages in Iran. But anyway, they want to take down that regime. So that's convoluting this right now. But I do think we are rethinking the whole proposition of we've got a lot of oil right now. That might not persevere, and it certainly might not if the price drops precipitously because it costs so much to frack. And we're in a pretty good position, and we're not that concerned about our allies anymore, which is what I saw as a military professional at the end of my career and then a diplomat with Colin Powell, that we were tapering off a bit because we didn't have that much interest in the flow of oil through the Gulf. Well, that's complicated now by the fact that I'm told by very competent authority in the oil communities that Iraq, were it to be going whole hog, that is to say, everything was efficient, everything was working like it should work, all the majors were in there beavering away, would probably surpass Saudi Arabia in terms of the oil. It's already putting out a lot of oil. So let's say 20% or so, 90% of the world's needs are flowing through the Strait of Hormuz still. And much of Iraq's oil was going to China. I think Russia has replaced some of that, but still, China has an interest in Iraq's oil. So I don't know what they're going to do, but I find it very difficult to believe Saudi Arabia, the Gulf Cooperation Council members in general, the Arab League, Egypt. I'm not sure what they're going to do because they're so feckless. They're almost as feckless as we are. And they're sitting increasingly on restive populations. Sisi, incredibly so, because he can't even feed Egyptians, and he's got about, 2 million refugees in his midst. And he's got this problem right next door in Gaza. I don't know where they're going. And just like I don't know where Erdogan is going. If I were Saudi Arabia, I think I'd probably pick up the phone, call Erdogan and say, I'll solve your economic problems if you'll just hit Israel and Syria and teach them a lesson. That's what I'd do if I were Mohammed bin Salman. You got economic problems, I'll solve them. 200 billion and will be in your bank account next week or whatever. It's not going to happen. And I just don't see any direction out of the Arabs. I remember a remark, apocryphal or not, I don't think it was, that was attributed to Moshe Dayan at the close of the 1967 Six-Day Miracle War, when a reporter was chasing him and trying to get him to say, "How'd you do it? How'd you do it? How'd you do that?" And he turned around and said, "Well, it helps to be fighting Arabs." Well, there's a comment for you. The Arabs don't seem to ever be able to get their act together, particularly vis-a-vis their dependency on the empire. But they just might with these kinds of developments, particularly if the empire goes ahead with what they've suspected for about a decade or longer. And that is that we are planning on retrenching.
Well, the US pulse in the Middle East obviously has been very destructive, as well as you have spoken about many times, especially based on your experience in the Bush administration in the 2000s. But when the US pulls back, it's not as if utopia is the alternative either. There's a lot of unresolved issues and possible disruptions in the regions to replace the current problems. So, but it is too.
Not the least of which will be 50 million Americans like Huckabee, our ambassador in Jerusalem, who think the end times are here, and if we withdraw, we'll mess that up.
It's always reassuring.
You can't make this strip up.
Well, it's not reassuring when people look towards the scripture for foreign policy, but
I'm sure you heard that interview with Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson. Cruz says he gets national security decision-making advice from Genesis.
Yeah, but interpreted the Bible there a bit creatively as well, I guess. It's
absolutely. That's a forte of these people. They find what verse and chapter that fits their preconceived notions and throw it out there.
But even if that was the case, we probably shouldn't have 2,000-year-old text determine our security policy. I did also want to ask about what this means for the transatlantic alliance system, because I think initially a lot of Europeans, they thought we can just wait out Trump like last time and we'll go back to the way things were. Indeed, the Ukraine war kind of was believed to revive the transatlantic relationship. NATO had, its new purpose. The Soviet Union was back, or the efforts to restore the Soviet Union. All these nonsense narratives which serve the purpose, but now instead it seems to have brought the US to the conclusion that they're being exhausted in Europe and looking to get rid of this, or not end the war necessarily, but at least outsource it and offload it on the Europeans. But what do you see in the future of the US and Europe? You and I have spoken in the past about the whiteboards you guys had in the White House with which European leaders should be elevated and who should be stomped down. I mean, do you think this will keep going, or you see a more split in relation here?
There are different answers I would give on a tactical sort of basis with regard to whether you're talking Israel, Germany, France, the Scandinavian countries, or whatever. But I'll give you my general view, and that is that it didn't work. We started in my administration to actually buy governments in Europe. We started to use all manner of NGOs and other type organizations, USAID preeminent amongst them, which is why I didn't have too much problem with what Rubio did to USAID. Although the contracts are still being overseen and still being executed, and they'll go on for another 3 to 5 years because you don't just kill contracts. We started this momentum to get the Jens Stoltenbergs, the Mark Rutte's, to get the Starmers, to get the Macrons, to get ultimately to get the Schultz, and then to get the Merz and other leaders like that. The Finnish president recently made some comments that made me think he might be falling off this dope a little bit, this narcotic. But what's happened is that has crashed. It's fallen apart. Both our having done it and their having been the product of our having done it, is now falling apart. Macron is the first one to really show vulnerability, but Germany will follow, and certainly Great Britain will too, and other countries too over the next 2 years or so as their political systems change. All to say that I think the combination of this ineptitude of Europe, shown in their almost strident attempt to keep America in, and America's not accepting that, and now probably formally, or at least coming close to formally, repudiating it in a written sort of way, and certainly in a practice sort of way, is going to destroy it, destroy all the unity. It'll put the EU back in the cave it should not have ever come out of. And I mean, all the people who started all this with the monetary union and the coal and all the rest of the things that sort of built up over time into the EU are now crashing around everyone's ears, I think. So are the governments and so are the countries. And one wonders where it's going, but it isn't going to be helped in that going by the fact that the transatlantic link is going to sever too. I don't know what that means in the long run. I fear what it might mean in the long run for both sides of the Atlantic. Just as I fear for what's happening out in the Pacific with two other alliances, the Korean and the Japanese. They're actually showing really I won't call them growing pains. They're showing imperial pains with the alliances too. The only people really adhering like they were stuck to the empire are the Australians, but I think that will change too. So it's a very, very fluid situation right now, not least of which because of this transfer of power, this massive transfer of power. And I was just looking at this morning. Your viewers can't see this, but this is a page from Peter Frankopan's book, the Silk Roads, a new history of the world. And if you look at this, if you look at these railroads now, this is probably about 5 years old, but these railroads coming out of China cross Russia in the northern sphere, cross the Caucasus and Central Asia in the central sphere, and cross Iran and come up to Berlin and Warsaw in the southern. These are railroads that are built and functioning and will transform the world in terms of commerce. They are coming out of the east and going to the west and stopping at all the stops in between, from Dushanbe to Samarkand, all the way to Ankara and all the way to Warsaw, Berlin, and points even further west. This is the new world. This is also avoiding the greatest threat to economic success, if you will, that the empire could exert over them should it want to. Its navy on the high seas, because this is all land-based. This goes way back 2,000 years to when the shifts took place with different empires and how they did their trade. They would go inland in order to avoid what was happening on the high seas because certain empires had big navies and they were treacherous with the use of those navies. So they went inland. Perfect example is the route of this railroad up the Persian Gulf and into the soft belly, if you will, of Russia. And with the Caucasus there benefiting from it. All of this is happening and we can't do anything about it. It's inexorable. It is happening because the number one economy in the world is behind it. And now we have compelled the largest population-wise country in the world, India, and with great economic potential if it ever harnesses it well, and Russia into a triple alliance, if you will, opposing us. This is not good for Europe or for the United States. And the United States is backing away from Europe, so there won't be any cohesion in opposing this. And I don't mean opposing it in a security way, with armies and bombs and bullets and bayonets and so forth. I mean strategic competition that also is accompanied by strategic collaboration and strategic cooperation, because we've got some really, really big challenges confronting us, like the climate crisis and nuclear weapons with no treaties, which Trump started out in Alaska well on and got Putin's attention. I'm told that was the one successful point. Putin agreed with him, wanted to renew New START in February of 26 or earlier, and wanted to bring Xi Jinping in and wanted to talk about other nuclear weapons states and bringing them into a multilateral regime in the world that would at least try to police a little bit this profligacy we now have with nuclear weaponry. That's dead. As I understand it, it's dead now. Putin's given up on Trump. So where are we going? I don't have a clue, but I know it isn't good.
Well, we also use the language Europe, this and Europe that as an entity, but do you think the Europeans would even be a cohesive unit? Not that they're so cohesive now, but the idea that they can have a common policy, they have very different interests. If they're not anchored in the transatlantic relationship and also helped by the United States helping to, I guess, pick the leaders of Europe. To what extent is it possible, you think, for the Europeans to actually remain a pole of power if they're not that united to begin with, though?
I think they have to do what Colin Powell and H.W. Bush and Jim Baker and Brent Scowcroft and a host of other people, even Dick Cheney, talked about at the end of the Cold War, and that was they need to stand up their own security identity, and it needs to evolve eventually into an independent security identity. That doesn't mean it doesn't cooperate in an interoperability sort of way, You got icebreakers, we don't. So Finland, you're going to have the icebreaking role if we go to war in the Arctic or whatever. That sort of thing could still happen. And the nuclear umbrella of the United States could still extend over them. But they have to take over their own security in a visceral, conventional, on-the-ground sense, in that sea sense. I think that is it's still a viable concept, but I don't see the leadership in Europe to bring that about, and I definitely don't see it in Washington to help them bring that about. What I see is this new document which says we're going to the Western Hemisphere and the homeland.
Well, if the Europeans had known the US would retrench, we probably wouldn't have gone to war against Russia or fight a proxy war, because this is, looking as if it's failing. Well, how are you reading now, though, the situation on this war against Russia? Because at the moment, the Russians are coming out pursuing a very heavy, brutal attrition strategy to finally knock out the Ukrainians to get the war over with. And, let's say there's some panic, especially in Europe. You hear it from the politicians, the journalists. They keep saying, ceasefire, we need to end to the war. At the same time, sanctions, weapons. The common thread is we have to do something because now things are going the wrong way. But I'm not sure what you make, for example, of the Russian drones, which allegedly ended up in Polish territory.
Very interesting that came at a time when the Poles were talking about fairly decisively no troops in Ukraine, no Polish troops in Ukraine. How to get them to change their mind? This isn't the way to get them to change their minds. This was a stunt as far as I'm concerned, or it was errant drones. I mean, it is possible that they were just errant drones. There are so many in the air, it's a wonder that we haven't had more of this. I suspect we have, it just doesn't get reported all the time. I don't think there's anything to it. It's a tempest in a teapot. It's people, if it is a sort of flag operation, it's people trying to influence things that are the water's already flowed under the bridge. And your question's first part indicates that. What Putin is doing, what the Russian military is doing, I kind of liken it to the Battle of Kursk, the real Battle of Kursk in World War II, where after that, the Wehrmacht was running and the Russians were walking, but they were shooting while they walked. And from the Vistula to Berlin didn't take much longer. I think the Ukrainian military, per Putin's SMO objective, is being utterly destroyed. And I think that's what he's going to keep doing in a very plodding Russian fashion He's going to make them come to points where things look dicey, and then he's going to destroy them when they do. I think he's also probably going to peel off and take Odessa. He may take some other parts of other oblasts, other than the ones that he has, but I don't think he'll cross the Dnieper in any significant sort of way, other than, and this is sort of, riding it down to Odessa, taking Odessa. And maybe he'll do that in his own sweet time. In the meantime, the major objective, destroying utterly the armed forces of Ukraine, will be taking place. That's what's happening. And somewhere in there, I think you're going to see the Ukrainian government collapse.
Well, I guess my last question is more about how the U.S. own position will be within all of this. I mean, you mentioned the retrenchment, which looks credible given the challenges the United States have, but it's not just a shift in power and ideology. It also appears to be linked a bit in capabilities. That is, the United States has some economic problems coming its way. I mean, what are you looking at when you look at the possible, decline of empire? You're looking at the economic, the military, political, the moral. How do you assess the sustainability of the U.S. hegemon, which is, I guess if there is a retrenchment, that's a good indication of adjusting to unfavorable realities.
A quick answer to your multi-component question is it looks a lot like the Western Roman Empire at the end. Everything is impacting the deterioration. A 30 plus, soon to be 40 plus $1 trillion aggregate debt, a $1 trillion annual interest payment soon, in less than 6 to 7 years, according to the Congressional Budget Office, to be $2 trillion, which in nominal increases will consume all discretionary federal spending, just paying the interest on the debt. Some people are saying we're looking for a global war, perhaps a nuclear war, in order to fight our way out of that debt. I hope to hell that's not what we're looking for. I don't think it would work anyway. I think it would hasten the deterioration of America and maybe dismember the Union, as it were. That's always out there as a possibility, especially when you start doing things like Trump is doing right now. I could see states that would find it more conducive to their future in their immediate perspective being non-members of the Union, as it were. That's not an impossibility, dismemberment of the country. If you go back and look at Jefferson and Adams' letters to one another after they reconcile, you'll see that they were worried about this sort of thing. They were principally worried about the war they knew was coming over slavery. But that worry expressed was worry that you can translate into more than just slavery. It's the very concept of a democratic federal union entity, whatever you want to call it. I'd call it a federal conclave with democratic tendencies. They thought it would be impossible to keep that together for more than a century. And we've kept it together longer than that. So it's past its sell-by date, you might say. And since we became imperial, certainly in 1945, but building towards that from 1870 to 1945, we have just lost our way. We had another monolith out there to check us for a good while in the Cold War, but now we don't have anything like that. But it is building. It is building, but it is not intent on war. It does not want war. It does not want anything to do with war because it knows that we would lose conventionally in any fight we had in the South China Sea and Taiwan or wherever it might be. We're going to lose in Iran, Glenn, if we go in there, and then we will nuclear. And they do not want that to happen. They do not. In any of the SCO countries, I don't think any of the leadership wants a nuclear war. The only people I hear talking about a nuclear war live in America. And I hear them talking about it in the most incredible guises, like this business of getting us out of the debt trap we have put ourselves in by causing a war that ultimately goes nuclear, and we win it because we have better news. Now, this is a fringe element, but it's wearing uniforms in some aspects of it. And it disturbs me to hear people talking that way. Get out of our debt trap by causing a global war that might even go nuclear. That's, to me, nonsense. But I look back on the history of empire and I say, wait a minute, Larry, it's not nonsense. Look at what some of the other empires in history as they were going down tried to do. So it's scary for me right now. I'm at the end of my life, and I spent 31 years of it in the military and 40 years roughly in government, and I'm watching my country go to pieces. And I'm watching a clown, really. Maybe he has some good instincts, but he's a clown when it comes to decision making and policy and strategy. And clowns all around him orchestrate the downfall. It's not very comforting. It's not very comforting at all. I'm really worried for my country.
Interviewed on this program a common friend of ours, Judge Napolitano, and he was making this prediction, though, that he didn't think the United States would be able to stay together as a consequence of I guess, not just the pending economic problems, but also the political and social problems of the United States. But um, the possibility of escalating this into a major war with nuclear weapons, though, this is quite concerning, well, to say the least.
Very
But
much. Did you hear Doctorow, Gilbert Doctorow on Judge this morning, I believe, or I watched it this morning? The German parliamentarian who told him that the way Iran went down in the beautiful war was that Bibi called Trump, and this German parliamentarian had spent many years in Iran for Germany. I think he was a diplomat at the time. And what happened was Bibi called Trump and said, I'm going to use a nuclear weapon on the sites. Whether it was a bluff or what, who knows? But Trump said, don't do that. Don't do that. I'll take care of them for you. I'll take care of them for you. And that's how we got the B-2 business and the bombing of Fort Isfahan and other facilities. And we warned the Iranians we were going to do it. Now, I knew we'd done that. I knew they had time to move critical equipment and so forth. I knew we had warned them we were going to bomb. Then we moved into the negotiations, and with great perfidy, we let Israel kill a lot of their people and everything in the middle of negotiations. The discussion was really interesting from the point of view of the venality of my country. And certainly I didn't need any reinforcement of the venality of Bibi Netanyahu. But it was a hell of a discussion, really.
well, I was told by Gilbert Doctorov. He sent me an email with this encounter with the parliamentarian, and I did think to myself, though, it does change if it is correct. I mean, there's a lot of ifs here, but if it is correct, it will have a big impact on how this whole thing is interpreted. Because in this way, if it's not true, then of course Trump very recklessly attacked the nuclear reactors of Iran, which is just pure madness. If it is correct, though, what this story is, he's almost a man of peace now, preventing nuclear war. It is, but I mean, my point is, it is kind of important to know whether or not that this is correct, because that's puts Trump either in preventing nuclear war or a madman attacking nuclear reactors. So it is it's worth something to explore, to, I guess, look for people or leaks or something to dictate or to suggest what actually happened in this conflict. I even asked Mohammed Marandi about this on this program, because he's a former advisor to the Iran's nuclear negotiation team, and again, there wasn't much. Well, he's not connected directly to the government, so he wouldn't sit with this information either. But it is an interesting thing, because that's something that the Russians would like to know as well. Are the Americans now, sharpening their knives while they're negotiating with them, or is this, Trump genuine about his desire to fundamentally change relations? So I would, no, this will be a very good indicator to show what kind of a man and President Donald Trump is.
It is, and I have to tell you that I've been reinforced in my view that it might be an accurate depiction of his decision making with regard to that situation, because people tell me, including the judge from time to time, Judge Napolitano, who know Trump and have known him for a long time, that in his gut, he does not like war and he doesn't like nuclear weapons. And if it came to it and he had the capacity to do it, he would do it. He would stop it. That made me feel a little bit better about him, but I don't know. Maybe I'm swallowing hook, line, and sinker, the MAGA line. I just don't know.
Well, we already ran out of time, so thank you for your insights, and there's a lot of questions which should be answered. One criticism of the Trump administration, from my perspective, is the intentional policy of strategic ambiguity. That is, let everyone keep guessing. This is not something I find comforting, or
No.
making it very easy to predict what direction they're taking. But again, this is by design. So thanks again.
Truly. Thank you for giving me the chance.